Everything I say in this video is going to be true. There's no propaganda. I want to make it clear. And this is about the infamous China's one-child policy. It's been known throughout the world, and obviously this has had major consequences in terms of changing China's culture and its history. So let's get started. This is through my personal experience. I was born in China before I moved to Canada many years ago. It is very bad. Just I'm sure you guys have all seen on the news the school shootings and the mass shootings in the US and the crisis US has with gun controls and mass shootings. I would say the child kidnapping issue is just as bad in China because due to the nature of the Chinese Communist Party, many things are censored and their state media has control over everything. So it's hard to give the exact numbers. So before I move on further, and this is a connection to the previous video on the importance of having a son. This is passed down for many generations, thousands of years, and thankfully it's turned around since the start of the 21st century. Feminism, gender equality has slowly taking over the Chinese culture, and I would say things are changing for the better for the most part. But for the vast majority of the 5,000 years, this is the true case. You must pass on the family name, and I will revisit this topic as well in my future videos on ancient China. I do have two siblings. This is mainly because of many divorces in my family. Yes, things in China and the West are very similar now in many aspects. So I have two half siblings. I have an older sister, same mom, different dad. She lives in China. I also have a younger sister, same dad, different mom. The one-child policy, there were exceptions. It was only applied to the Han Chinese population. So in China, there's different ethnic groups in the Xinjiang Autonomous Region, where most of the population are Muslims. But over 90% of the population are Han Chinese. So the other minorities, they make up roughly 8 to 9% of the population. This did not apply to them. This never did. They could have as many children as they want. The one-child policy, even if you're from the Han Chinese ethnic group, is one per marriage. You could have a kid and get divorced and marry again and have another one. I want to make that clear. This is how I have two half siblings. And you see there, during the height of the one-child policy, see in the 1990s, see how many children are getting kidnapped. And these could be propaganda numbers. The real number could be much higher. So it is definitely a crisis and it's still ongoing. And there's also one thing that's important to mention is that you notice there are way more boys getting kidnapped versus girls, and that's extremely important as well as I go on in this video. So the one-child policy officially lasted for 36 years, and there's a very important term that's associated with it. In China, you always hear the term 80后, which literally translates to after the 80s. Vast majority of the people born in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, they did not have any siblings. My story is slightly different, but this is true for 90% of the families. As of now, families in China are allowed to have up to 3 children, which is still really messed up if you think about it. Life is not fair, and there are goods and bads to every government in the world. Not everything is perfect in the Canada and US by any means, so this is just one aspect of it. So one major issue you notice is that the replacement fertility rate is 2.11 per woman. So basically, to put it in simple terms, right now, let's say in Canada you have roughly 20 million people in the workforce. And let's say in 10 years from now, 5 million of those 20 million will retire. And now if every family only has one child, instead of 5 million people replacing those 5 million that are retired, you're only going to have 2.5 million workers coming in. And that's going to be an issue. Even Elon Musk has mentioned it. Japan's facing that issue right now. There could be a population crisis and the population collapse. More on that later. So China is going through a major demographic transition, and this is evident in the nations in the West already. As you can see, we have Canada and China's demographic charts compared side by side. It's extremely similar. In the middle, you have the baby boomers there, born shortly after World War II, and you can see a very strong decline in birth rates. This is mainly due to better education, family planning, access to food, access to healthcare, and many other things considered. So at the current rate, Canada and China will be at the same place where Japan is in the next 20 to 30 years. See, the major concern is not the population pyramid you see there and the shrinking population. The major concern is this. In almost every single country worldwide, women will outlive men. This is on average, obviously. If you look at these two lines here, look at where the blue line, that's the number of males in China, and look at the darker line at the bottom, that's the number of females in China. There's a very significant gap. Even though the life expectancy in China on average for women is much higher than men, but there are so many more men than women. This is where the one-child policy is turning very, very dark. So the evidence are staggering. It's hard to collect real hard data, but just to give an example, in the city of Shenzhen, it's just on the mainland China side of Hong Kong. In Shenzhen's public schools, there's 34% more male students than female students. In many regions in China, you see this number between 20 to even 50%. This is extremely absurd, and things are taking an extremely dark turn here. So 3 key points. The one-child policy for 36 years, plus the Chinese tradition and the importance of having a son in the family to pass on the family name. This has led to millions of gender-selective abortions over the years and the decades. There's no way to count them all. I'm sure you guys have seen the memes on Western social media, on South Park, in cartoons, in TV shows. Unfortunately, almost all of them are true. They might seem derogatory and propaganda aimed at bashing China, but many of them are true. Because of the one-child policy, millions of parents have decided to abort baby girls, and it is extremely disturbing. I still get chills when I think about it, the lives that were lost. Hard to say the exact number. I would say in the ranges of 20 to 30%. These men will never ever get married, simply because of the fact that there are way more men than women. I put the text in the center of the screen. This is from the Mulan movie in the Disney live adaptation. Remember, on her sword, there are 4 Chinese characters. At the beginning there was 3, and they finished with 4. And those characters were translated to strong, brave, true. The very last one is very important. It's the character Xiao, and it was translated to devotion to my family. So many people in China are still very old-fashioned, and because of these leftover men, and many of them are uneducated, and they live in very, very remote regions, so they're desperate for any kind of opportunity to grab a children, especially young boys, to pass on the family name. And this has led to tens and thousands of cases of kidnappings of young children in China over the years, especially in the 1990s. And it is still an epidemic going on today. Like I said, it is just as bad as the mass shootings in the US. And one of the popular spots where children can get kidnapped is the Chinese train stations. China has the most complex rail network system anywhere in the world. The trains in China, they travel to every corner of the country. Even if it's a hamlet of maybe 150 or 200 people, they might not have a train station, but at least they will have a train stop. And some days, hundreds of thousands of travelers will go through these busy stations in mega cities all over China. It gets so crowded, a child can easily get lost or separated from their parents. And the next thing you know, the kid is on a train, on a bus, on a van. It can be any form of transportation, and they could be taken into a remote village and be sold to a single man that cannot get a wife or a girlfriend that's desperate to find a kid to pass on the family name. And I'm using the train station as an example because it can be an extremely dangerous place. I've been to the Beijing Central Rail Station many times. It is so crowded 24/7 all the time, and you have people from every single corner of the country. If you lose something, you'll never be able to find it. If someone snatches your purse, next thing you know, they're 8 hours away in some remote village. I want to make it clear, I will never lie or fabricate any stories. This is from my personal experience. Like I said, my family has had a lot of issues over the years, but every family has their drama, right? So when my mom married my dad, she already had one previous unsuccessful marriage. That's where I had my older half sister. My dad and my mom, they divorced when I was just a baby. Their marriage was very, very short. Shortly after their divorce, my dad quickly married my stepmom, and she got pregnant, and she had my younger half sister. This happened when I was 4 years old. Around the same time, my mom was married again. This was her 3rd marriage. She lived across the street from me, and my grandma was taking care of me at the time. So this was a very chaotic time. So during this time, my mom, her husband at the time, my dad, my stepmom, they had a lot of arguments, a lot of disputes. Basically, I was left out to be abandoned because nobody had time to take care of me, and then nobody wanted me to be part of their life. So what happened was, my dad and my stepmom, they agreed in secret, and I was sent away to a completely different province. There's my hometown, Jilin. I showed this in my previous video on the protests happening in China, and my dad and my stepmom, and they sent me 4 provinces away to Hefei in the Anhui province, and I was completely given up. I was abandoned for over a year, and people say, "Oh, that's fake. How can you have memories from back then?" I will tell you this: it's because it happened for so long. It wasn't just a couple months. It was well over a year. I still have very vivid memories of getting sent away and getting picked up. When my mom finally came to her senses, and all these huge fighting, these huge arguments broke out between her, my dad, my stepmom, and my grandma. And in the end, it was my mom and my grandma that forced them to tell the truth that they had sent me away to a distant relative. And over a year later, it was my mom, my grandmother, her brother. They came to the train station in Hefei to pick me up to go back to Jilin. It's extremely hard for me to share this story because it's true, because this really happened. Many years have passed. I don't want to point any fingers. Everybody has had their issues with their families. But at the end of the day, if it wasn't for my mom, and especially for my grandmother, she was the most important person in my life, and she was the one that took care of me. So she passed away earlier this year in February after losing her battle with lung cancer and suffering a stroke the year before, which left her bedridden. It was one of the most difficult days of my life because growing up, she was everything to me, and she was the #1 reason why I could return home safely. And that's how I didn't end up in the hands of one of these child kidnappers in China. Young boys are extremely popular, especially in the 1990s. This is at the height of the child kidnapping. And when I was sent away, like, I wasn't just sent away for a year, year and a half, or 2 years. I was being abandoned. So eventually, this distant relative of my dad and my stepmoms, she wasn't going to take care of me for the long term. Most likely, what would have happened is, at some point, she wouldn't be able to take care of me anymore due to the financial stress and the burden, because she already has a kid on her own, and it was already too much on her. So I would have likely been sold to one of the leftover men in China that's not married and doesn't have any children, and I would never be heard from ever again. I could end up in a distant village in the mountains with a couple thousand people, and that would be the rest of my story. I wouldn't be here uploading any videos. And this is just the start of the series. I'm not making any propaganda. I'm not gonna talk about any conspiracies. I only want to talk about the truth, and I want to talk about the many good sides to China as well. So just some things I have on my mind. So I put a list on there. So in the future, the Chinese idioms, they'll be narrated in Mandarin. The text will be on the left, the English translation that is, and on the right there will be the Chinese characters along with the pinyin. So it will help you with pronunciation for anybody that wants to learn some intermediate level Mandarin Chinese and learn about Chinese history at the same time. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you guys in the next video.